Hi, and welcome to Drupal Brief. This is an AI-generated brief of another video, podcast, or blog post. If you want to learn more about what's being discussed here, then please go check out the source. This podcast is produced by the team at Drupal Forge. We would love to create more AI-generated briefs like this. Please contact Salim Lakhani on Drupal Slack or LinkedIn and let him know what else you want us to cover. Oh, and if you have not tried Drupal Forge yet, you're missing out. You'll be able to do twice as much in half the time. So go check it out. Okay, that's it. Make sure to click subscribe. And here we go.
All right, get ready. We're going deep on something that I'll admit sounds a bit intimidating. The revolt event loop.
Yeah, it does sound kind of like a sci-fi movie, doesn't it?
But trust me, if you're even a little curious about how Drupal can become way more powerful, this is going to be fascinating. No, really.
We're talking game changer stuff here. We're on a mission, basically, to uncover what this whole revolt thing is about, why people are freaking out about it.
And what it could actually mean for, well, anyone who builds and uses Drupal.
Right, like, will it change how we build sites? Will my site get faster? These are the questions we're going to answer.
Our guide for this deep dive, episode 474 of the Talking-Drupal podcast.
Oh, yeah?
They had Alexander Varag on.
The Drupal expert?
And he dropped some serious knowledge bombs, like mind-blowing stuff about the future of Drupal and, well, how this event loop thing fits in.
So we're going to unpack it all, figure out what's hype, what's real, and what you should actually care about.
Okay, so starting point, right? We know Drupal's built on PHP, good old PHP.
Yep, PHP.
And PHP, well, it can be a bit, how do I put this nicely, linear.
It's like a one-lane road, you know? Each line of code is like a car, and they have to go one after another.
Sometimes traffic's fine, but if one car slows down,
everything gets backed up.
Boom, spinning wheel of doom. Happens all the time in Drupal when it's waiting on something like a database query.
Exactly. And like PHP can multitask, kinda. It can run some things in the background, but it's always been tricky.
So that's where the event loop sweeps in to save the day, right?
It's like imagine an air traffic controller, but instead of planes, it's juggling all these different tasks, letting some run in the background while others wait for their turn.
Okay, that is a much cooler image. So how does this air traffic control thing help Drupal specifically? Why should we, care about it in the Drupal world?
Well, Drupal already does some of this asynchronous stuff, where tasks run at the same time, like BigPipe, the rendering system. But managing it is, well, let's just say it's complicated.
It's messy.
Yeah, messy. What Revolt does is it creates a standard way to handle all these asynchronous tasks. Makes everything smoother, more efficient.
Hold on. Standard, that's the key word here. So we're talking like one event loop to rule them all.
Exactly. Revolt's not reinventing the wheel. It's bringing together different PHP libraries that already do this asynchronous stuff. Names like React, PHP, Amped.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. Those names don't mean much to me. Are these things I should know? Or are they like the behind-the-scenes heroes making our lives easier?
Think of them as the mechanics who keep a super fast race car running. You don't need to know how the engine works. You just want to experience that speed.
I definitely want to experience that speed. But, even if this is all good news, Revolt still sounds kind of dramatic. Is this like some hostile takeover of how Drupal works?
Not at all. It's a collaboration. Drupal core is adopting this standard event loop so developers can use familiar tools, and Drupal itself benefits from all that existing innovation.
Okay, phew. But I gotta ask, if this Revolt thing is mostly working behind the scenes, will we actually notice a difference? Or is this one of those, deep in the code things that only super technical people will appreciate?
You'll notice, for sure. Think about all those times Drupal's waiting for database queries, right? Like when you load a page and it just sits there. Well, imagine those queries suddenly running in parallel. Like, instead of a traffic jam, everything's moving smoothly on multiple lanes.
Okay, now that I would notice.
And that's just the beginning of what Revolt can do.
Welcome back. We're knee-deep in this whole Revolt event loop thing, and it's getting pretty exciting. Last time, we talked about how it's already changing how Drupal works at its core, like faster page loads, right?
Yeah, we just scratched the surface, though. The real fun is seeing Revolt in action, like real-world examples where it's already making Drupal better. Not just in theory, but right now.
Okay, spill the tea. Where is Revolt already making a difference? Don't tell me it's buried deep in the code where us regular folks can't see it.
Actually, it's working in a pretty important part of Drupal, BigPipe. Remember how it sends chunks of a page to your browser, as they're ready, instead of making you wait for the whole thing to load?
Yeah, BigPipe is pretty neat. It's like getting a sneak peek at a gift before it's fully unwrapped.
Exactly. And BigPipe was already using some asynchronous tricks, but with Revolt, it's like BigPipe got a turbo boost.
Okay, I'm picturing BigPipe with, flames painted on the side now. But how does the event loop actually make it faster? What's happening behind the scenes?
So think about a page with lots of blocks. A header, some content, a sidebar, all that stuff. Drupal used to render each one in order, then send the whole package once it was done.
Which could take a while, especially if some of those blocks were like waiting on database queries or pulling in data from somewhere else. It's the waiting.
Right. But with BigPipe and Revolt, those blocks can get rendered at the same time. It's like the event loop is the choreographer, making sure they all dance in sync without tripping over each other.
So while one block is waiting for its data, another one can jump in and get rendered. So the user sees progress instead of just a blank screen. That's pretty slick.
And it's only going to get slicker. As more of Drupal core gets optimized for Revolt, this kind of parallel processing is going to be everywhere.
Okay, so BigPipe's getting a lot of love. What else is getting this speed boost from Revolt?
Database queries, they can be a major bottleneck in Drupal, right?
Oh.
Especially on sites with lots of data. It's like rush hour on the database highway.
Too real. Way too real.
With Revolt, though, imagine those cars all getting their own lane. Things just flow.
Okay, walk me through this. I'm trying to picture it in my mind. How do database queries actually work differently with the event loop?
Okay, imagine a page that's showing like a list of articles. Each one has an image, the author's info, maybe some related content. Traditionally, each of those elements would need its own database query done one after another.
So it's like sending out one messenger pigeon at a time, waiting for each one to return before sending the next one.
Right. But with the event loop, it's like having a whole flock of pigeons taking off at once. Each one fetches its data, and the event loop gathers it all back together when it's ready.
Much better than messenger pigeons. And I'm guessing this all happens behind the scenes, so developers don't actually have to rewrite all their queries?
For the most part, yeah, it's like Drupal got a performance upgrade without anyone having to do any extra work.
Major props to the folks working on core to make all this happen. But speaking of developers, does this event loop thing make Drupal harder or easier to work with? Because I'm hearing both sides of that story.
Honestly, it's a bit of both. For most developers, the event loop will be this invisible helper, making things faster without them needing to change how they code.
Okay, that's good news for a lot of people.
But for developers who do need to work directly with the event loop, well, there is a bit of a learning curve. Asynchronous programming isn't always the easiest thing to wrap your head around.
I can imagine. So for those folks, is it going to be a huge headache to learn how to use the event loop?
Actually, here's the thing. Revolt actually makes it easier to manage asynchronous tasks. Before Revolt, developers had to use all these different libraries and techniques, each with its own little quirks. It was messy.
Sounds kind of like trying to put together furniture from different stores where the parts don't quite match and the instructions are in different languages.
Exactly. But now with Revolt, we have this standardized way to handle asynchronous tasks. It's like getting a beautiful, already assembled piece of furniture with clear, easy-to-follow instructions.
Okay, I like where this analogy is going. So Revolt's like the IKEA of asynchronous PHP.
Exactly. It brings order and consistency, which makes it way easier for developers to write and maintain asynchronous code.
Huge win for developers, for sure. But what about debugging? Asynchronous code has a reputation for being, well, a pain to troubleshoot. Any hope for us non-experts?
There is. The event loop actually helps make debugging easier in some ways. With the old way of doing asynchronous programming, it was like trying to follow a conversation where everyone's talking over each other.
Oof, yeah, I've been in those conversations. Not fun.
Right. But the event loop brings some order. It's like having a moderator who makes sure everyone speaks in turn so you can follow the flow of the conversation.
Makes sense. So less chaos, more structure. But what about security? Asynchronous code with all its moving parts. Doesn't that open up more vulnerabilities?
Security is always a concern, especially with any new technology. But the Drupal community takes this very seriously. Remember, the Drupal security team did a thorough review of Revolt before it even made it into core.
Okay, that's good to know, but can you give us some specifics? What kind of security risks are we talking about with asynchronous code?
One common issue is race conditions. It's when you have two processes trying to access the same data at the same time. It can corrupt the data. Like if two people were trying to edit the same Google Doc at the same time, you'd end up with a jumbled mess.
Yikes, not good.
But there are ways to prevent that. Locking mechanisms, for example, they make sure that only one process can access the data at a time, like having a bouncer at the door, making sure things stay orderly.
So one at a time, no fighting. Got it. What other security gremlins do we need to watch out for?
Another one is timing attacks. This is where an attacker tries to figure out the timing of asynchronous events to, gain access or cause problems. It's like if they figured out the exact moment to strike when a system is most vulnerable because they know how long some processes take.
So they're studying the system, like figuring out the security guard's patrol route so they know when to sneak in.
It is sneaky. But again, there are ways to make it harder for them. Adding some randomness to the timing can throw them off.
So, like, making the security guard's route unpredictable. Love it.
And the good news is, as developers become more familiar with asynchronous programming, these security best practices will become second nature to them.
Okay, so it sounds like there are definitely some things to watch out for, but the Drupal community is on top of it.
Definitely. And with the right precautions, the benefits of asynchronous Drupal totally outweigh the risks. We're talking a whole new level of performance and capability.
So we've talked about how Revolt impacts core Drupal and even how developers work, but what about the bigger picture? How is all of this going to change Drupal itself, like fundamentally?
That's the really exciting part. We'll dive into that next time when we explore the future of Drupal in this brave new world of asynchronous possibilities.
All right, we're back and we're ready to talk about the big picture. Like, how is this Revolt event loop thing going to actually change Drupal? Not just make things a bit faster, but like fundamentally change what Drupal can do.
Exactly, because we're not just talking about websites anymore. We're talking about, well, almost anything you can imagine.
Okay, you've definitely got my attention, but before we get carried away, let's talk about some real-world stuff. Like, where is Revolt already making Drupal better? Not in some far-off future, but right now.
One example that's going to make a lot of people happy is the work being done on Drupal's cache API. Remember how, like, after you update your site, sometimes things are slow for the first few visitors while the cache rebuilds?
Ugh, yeah. Cache warming delays. The worst.
Well, imagine if the caches could, like, pre-warm themselves in the background using the event loop, like during regular traffic, so nobody even notices.
Wait, so no more separate cron jobs, no more manually triggering cache rebuilds. It just happens.
Exactly. Like a self-cleaning oven, but for your website.
Okay, that's a good analogy. I'm sold. What else is getting this magic touch?
The config import system, when you import config changes, Drupal has to process this whole chain of dependencies. It could take a while.
Especially on big sites with lots of configuration.
Right, but with Revolt, that could all happen in parallel, making those imports super fast.
So instead of carefully importing one config item at a time, Drupal could just analyze what's connected and import tons of things all at once.
If there are no conflicts, yep, saves developers a ton of time. And this is just scratching the surface.
It makes me think, where else could Revolt do this? Where could it speed up things that Drupal usually does step by step?
Oh, tons of places like the batch API. Right now, big tasks like importing a ton of content happen one step at a time.
Which can tie up your server for, like, ages.
But imagine those batches broken up, processed concurrently with the event loop. It would be way faster.
Okay, so we've got core improvements, but what about the modules we all use and love? Any cool examples of how Revolt's impacting Contrib already?
We already talked about GraphQL. It gets a huge speed boost from Revolt, makes headless Drupal even more powerful.
Right. Being able to fetch data from all these different sources at the same time, that opens up some serious possibilities for headless Drupal.
And it's not just GraphQL. Think about things like modules for search engines, like Elasticsearch, instant results, even with huge amount of content.
Okay, yeah, that would be amazing.
Or integrating with CRM systems like Salesforce, keeping your data in sync constantly without any delays.
So it's not just about websites anymore. Drupal's becoming this platform for, well, almost anything.
Right. It can handle real-time data, persistent connections. We could build things like real-time chat applications with Drupal, collaborative editing tools, maybe even game backends.
Wait, Drupal powering online games? Now that is something I never thought I'd hear.
This sounds kind of crazy, right? But with Revolt, it's actually possible.
I can't wait to see what people come up with. This is getting me seriously excited about the future of Drupal.
Me too. And the thing is, this is just the beginning. We're only just starting to see what's possible with Revolt and this whole asynchronous Drupal thing.
It feels like a turning point, you know, like Drupal's graduating from website builder to something much bigger.
Definitely. And for everyone listening, the takeaway is this. Even if you never actually write any asynchronous code, you're still going to benefit from it.
Faster websites, more powerful modules, Drupal suddenly being able to do all these crazy things we never thought possible. It's all thanks to this thing called the event loop.
And if you want to explore further, we'll have links to the Talking Drupal episode and some other resources in our show notes.
Awesome. And before we wrap up, here's a final thought to leave you with. If you could build anything with Drupal, knowing it could handle tons of data and real-time stuff, what would you create?
That's a good question to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the future of Drupal. It's going to be an exciting ride.
Definitely.
All right. What did you think? Did the AI-generated thing work for you? Let us know. Anyway, to close off this podcast, I just wanted to remind you that this brief was a fully AI-generated summary, and we take no credit for the original content. If you want more AI-generated summaries like this, then let us know. Contact Salim Lakhani on Drupal Slack or LinkedIn. By the way, we're automating the entire process from start to finish, so these briefs can be generated hands-free and on schedule. You want something else covered? We're happy to do it for you. This brief was brought to you by Drupal Forge. Drupal Forge is the new #1 platform to try, demo, and develop Drupal sites, and it is completely free to use. It is a community-supported nonprofit platform run by volunteers, just like yourself. Come join us.